This is not great. Oh, that's because of this. Um, video. Video. Hello.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, hello,
Hello?
hello.
We can hear you, 908. Whoever you are, mysterious
It
908.
is, it's Martial.
Hi,
Oh, hey,
Marcia. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
Good, very good. We're just giving people a few more minutes to gather, and then we'll start.
Yeah,
So-
thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Leslie. Good to see you.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Laura. So, does everybody know Miriam Axelute? Probably not.
No, probably not.
Hi, Miriam.
Hello.
Hey.
Miriam, what's your official title now?
I'm the CEO editor-in-chief at Shelter Force. That's my official title. But I grew up going to First UU. I was there from a little baby all the way through young adulthood.
And her
Hey.
dad, Paul Axelute, still manages our website. And she's in Albany. Becky, do you know Miriam Axelute?
Just by name from Shelter Force.
Yeah, we've met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long ago.
Hi,
Yeah.
Miriam.
Yeah.
So she took over from
From
Harold.
Harold.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
We have we now actually have co-leadership. So I've been the editor for a while, but we also have a new publisher now, Shalon Hawkins, and the two of us are working together.
Oh,
Terrific.
great.
Molly, do you know Miriam Axelute?
Yeah, I feel like we've corresponded, but I don't know if we've met in person. Hi,
Sounds right. Hello.
nice to see you.
Yeah. So glad you could come.
Me too. Thanks for letting me know about
Looks like we've got a pretty great crew here. So I think I'm gonna do a little introduction and let's get going on this afternoon's Faith Plus Works. I'm Charlie Wyrene. I'm the managing director of the Hub, which is First UU's now 5-year-old urban ministry. I'm also a member of First UU with my wife and 2 kids. Kids are in the back and Tammy's around as well listening. So in 2015, First UU took the biblical work of James from 2:26 to heart, that faith without works is dead. And they took a leap of faith, pivoting from traditional parish ministry to focus on an outward-facing, community-serving urban ministry through the Hub, this new nonprofit community-based organization that's really been bringing a lot of life and activity to the church. But just as faith without works is dead, we believe that the reverse to be true as well, that works without faith is both ungrounded and drifting. So to root the new work the congregation and its allies had committed to, we created Faith Plus Works and began inviting friends and other allies committed to social justice and service to talk about their faith, their beliefs, whatever they may be, and how these beliefs shape and guide their life's work. So we've had a monthly Faith Plus Works since January of 2017, which is quite an accomplishment for a lay-led faith community, I think. This fall, we've made the theme of our 4 Faith Plus Works services, Turn on the Love, to really help us keep our spirits high as we continue to navigate the frictions of the political, social, environmental, and economic climate we're living in and the complexities that the COVID pandemic is adding to the situation. As part of the Healthy Orange Coalition, Hub, First UU, and other organizations and folks we work with, we've been turning on the love since March, showing that we're all in this together and that we need to resist retreating in fear or uncertainty and rather turn on the love to reach out safely, to lift each other up and do everything we can to use this unstable moment to reorganize, strategize, and plan to move forward towards a stronger, more just and sustainable future. I've also been in conversation with other UU leaders around New Jersey about what role we can play in this uncertain and volatile moment. And the president of the UUA just sent a message about Unitarian Universalists' role right now, specifically related to the upcoming election. And there seem to be many people talking about the reality that our democracy is under attack through voter suppression, voter intimidation, and policies and rhetoric that undermine faith in our elections. What's on the line right now is the continuation of the world we had just before the pandemic, a world built on a rape and pillage economy, or a new version of a just and sustainable future. We need to do whatever we can to move towards this just and sustainable future, and the works we choose to do will determine whether we move that way or not. Our works seem more important than ever in this moment, and I can't wait to hear Dr. Lourdes Rodriguez's take on this idea. But first, we'll light our chalice and let Holly do an opening reading. Want to say hi?
Hi, my name's Camille, for those who don't know me.
Hi, Camille.
Hi, Camille.
Hi.
So we're chaliced, and yeah, Holly, you want to start things?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So for our reading today, I'm going to put the link in the chat in case anyone wants to read along. This is Voluntaries. It's a poem in praise of soldiers who gave up their lives for the Union. And this is from the Civil War issue of The Atlantic. It's Ralph Waldo Emerson. In an age of fops and toys, wanting wisdom, void of right, who shall nerve heroic boys to hazard all in freedom's fight? Break sharply off their jolly games, forsake their comrades gay, and quit proud homes and youthful dames for famine, toil, and fray. Yet on the nimble air benign speed nimbler messages that waft the breath of grace divine to hearts in sloth and ease. So nigh is grandeur to our dust, so near is God to man. When duty whispers low, thou must, the youth replies, I can. Over to you, Mindy.
I have that deer in the headlights moment. What am I doing? I forgot.
Introducing Lourdes.
Oh, yeah. Gone out of my mind. But it's because I had a root canal on Friday. I have an excuse. Brain muddle. Well, what could be more fun than introducing Lourdes, except to introduce Sarah and Leslie, which are joys coming up. Exactly. Charlie, could you, or Holly, maybe Holly, could you share your screen and show everybody Amani's incredible graphic of this event? So when we thought about this fall as Turn on the Love, we kicked around ideas of who would be the the leaders that we wanted to hear from, and it's been so wonderful that Lourdes, Sarah, and Leslie, who've been our colleagues in other previous projects like the Climb Project and 400 Years of Inequality, and Leslie from Community Research Group decades ago, have been involved in helping us think about collective recovery in this period. And so we said, wouldn't it be wonderful to hear from the three of them? And so that's how we got to this wonderful moment. So Lourdes Rodriguez is, hard to describe. She's like a one-of-a-kind kind of person. I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I could just play a video, because I have this cool video of Lourdes, about me talking about Lourdes. One of the things in my book, Urban Alchemy, that I talk about as a principle of how you repair cities is that you show solidarity. So we were, all of us, working in some parks in Washington Heights, and the parks had been abandoned by the city, just like left to rot. and had gained a very, very, very bad reputation. And Lourdes thought that in order to fix the reputation of the parks, we had to do an exorcism. That was how she described it, as a metaphor. And she said, well, how do you do an exorcism? One of the things she did, among many, was that she invented this thing she called walking meetings. And every group she could get, whether it was school teachers or community leaders or politicians, just everybody she could gather, she would say, let's go on a walking meeting. And then she would take them to the park. And then when they were in the park, they would just be blown away by the beauty of it, and just become committed to seeing the to seeing the parks restored. Thanks, Charlie, for putting up that gorgeous graphic. So this was made by Amani, who's one of our Hub's Joseph Thomas Berger Fellows, and is sort of the program that we're working on. And this is Amani's drawing of our church. And it's really beautiful, I think. But back to Lourdes. So just imagine a park that's not being cared for, and it's basically, people who are using drugs, people who are homeless are living in the park. And Lourdes said, we're going to do harm reduction. We don't want to drive anybody out of the parks. It's fine if they sleep in the parks, but it shouldn't only be drug users and homeless people. Everybody should be able to go to the park and enjoy the beauty. So how do we open that up? In the process of that, we actually became friends with a lot of people. So for example, one time we were walking towards the park, and a guy stopped us and he said, you can't go into the park today. Now, I don't know what was going on in there, but he was our friend and he said, no, you can't go in there. And that's because of Lourdes's practice of solidarity with all life. So she's an amazing person, and I'm so honored that she could join us today and share her views, because she is somebody who lives her faith in everything she does.
Thank you. And Mindy and others in the call know that I have the gift of the tear. So if I start crying, it's not you, it's me. Thank you so much for the invitation to come and have a conversation this Sunday afternoon. It's in the high 70s, low 80s here in Austin today. So sending you a lot of warmth from Texas. And if you'll allow me to, I would like to share the screen so I can have as a reference a few slides that I have titled "Works Are in the Eye of the Beholder." And for me, the invitation to think about faith and works is something that makes me really happy because I think that there are so many different ways in which faith can show up in your works, even when you are not thinking about it in that way. So I wanted to just share 3 stories today about how I see faith and works operating. But first, I need to, first I need to tell you about, oh man, now I need to go back because, how do I go back? There's a magical thing here. Oh, there you go. I found it. But first, I wanted to just anchor us in the scripture of from James or Santiago in Spanish, the book of James, that works is how people can see your faith externally. So faith is an internal thing that helps us stay aligned with the things that we believe in, but our works are the way that people understand where your faith is. And I want to take a moment to just, in fair warning, tell you about how I come to this. So I am coming to you today as a Puerto Rican woman that was born and raised in the island. And by definition, I acknowledge that I am a braided person. And that means that I have Taino, African slave, and Spanish colonizer blood in me. that and I have to acknowledge and honor all three of those rajitas, all of those streaks. I also come to you as a person that was baptized and raised in the Catholic Church. And while I acknowledge that the body of Christ is holy, the church on earth is led by flawed humans like me. And that because I acknowledge our flawness, I understand and I acknowledge that as a church, we've made mistakes and we've played a role that has been imperialistic at times. I don't come to you as a theology scholar, so if I get anything wrong, I welcome being corrected by my elders. But I am curious and I want to learn about things. So that's how I come to the work, and I'm trying to do double task here. All right, so with that in mind, I want to talk about three stories that are the context that provides the eye of the beholder. And I wanna talk a little bit about that because I think it picks up on Mindy's presentation last month about where did you get your metaphysics. For those of you who were not here, Mindy used the writings of Louisa May Scholz, her stories, to reflect what is ours to do in when we're facing difficulty. And she did that beautifully through her stories. So I want to talk about works and their context because I believe that what we think about works and what is valid work is in part shaped by our cultural, our social, our family, and our political context. And so I'm gonna share a story about works in the context of the Catholic Church, a story about works in the context of one's professional calling, from a journalist, and works in the context of family. And by the end, I hope that you all can share your own stories about how your works is shaped by your context. And I don't think about works as brownie points that earn your way to heaven. I think that works are how we can be, like St. Francis said, instruments of peace. We can be hands and feet in the body of Christ. All right. So, and when I talk about context, I talk about our circumstances. And I did my undergrad at the University of Puerto Rico, and one of the classes that I took was philosophy, and we read the work of Jose Ortega y Gasset, and he wrote that our context is our circumstances. So when I read this phrase, "Yo soy yo en mi circunstancia," it struck me because it was very simple, but it was an invitation to understand the self and to understand others by understanding the context in which they move, operate, live, breathe, play, pray, etc. And that, so there's a corollary to this idea. It's yo soy yo y mi circunstancia. Si no la salvo a ella, no me salvo yo. If I don't acknowledge it, I cannot acknowledge myself. If I don't know it, I cannot know myself. And for me, when he wrote that, that makes me think about how the way that we choose what works are ours to do has a lot to do with those circumstances that shape our life. So when Mindy extended this invitation to speak, I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? And then I remember that on a not so cold February morning earlier this year, as I was riding the bus with Richard Rohr, and not physically, he was not next to me, I was reading his work. I was reading a devotional from the Center for Action and Contemplation that introduced the writings of Reverend Dr. James Cone. And Richard made the case that Jesus Jesus' teaching on bringing good news to the poor inspired and empowered Dr. Reverend Cohn's writings and his theology. And I bet you $5 that you know the verse that I'm referring to. It's the one in Luke where Jesus walks into a synagogue, and this is not the opening line of a joke. Jesus walks into a synagogue, and he reads from the Torah, and he reads a verse from the prophet Isaiah, who had written this, many centuries before. And this is how it's written in Luke 4:18. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And then he did like a mic drop, and everybody was a little bit like horrified that he said, like, this is like, I'm the one who this scripture is talking about. And this is a clear message, I think, that Jesus left for us, that he came to bring good news to the poor. Like there's no denying that he was the embodiment of that scripture that Isaiah had written so long ago. So this is what Dr. Reverend James Cohn wrote. And Richard says of Dr. James Cohn that he's one of the greatest American theologians of this past century, but that not a lot of people know him. And he said that what Reverend Dr. Cohn said was that any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's message. Any theology that is indifferent to the theme of liberation is not Christian theology. And that is really hard to understand if your circumstances, right, are not met with oppression, or they don't put you in a context where you can see oppression in the people around you, or that you yourself are experiencing oppression. So that's where my head went to when I got the invitation to do this. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how people can choose works based on choosing a message that is about the liberation of the poor in a society. So because the point that I'm trying to make is that if I and my circumstances, and then how do my circumstances show up in the works that I choose to do? So I'm gonna put the devotional, that February 13 devotional, in at the end, and I'm happy to share the slides afterwards so you can see it. But if you look up that devotional, in a few words, Richard compares and contrasts the content of he compares and contrasts white and Black American theology to help make the case of why Reverend Dr. James Cohn said what he said about liberation. And this is what Richard says about this comparison. Unlike Europeans who immigrated to this land to escape from tyranny, Africans came in chains to serve a nation of tyrants. It was the slave experience that shaped our idea of this land. And this difference in social existence between Europeans and Africans must be recognized if we are to understand correctly the contrast in the form and content of Black and white theology. All right, so now to the stories, right? Because I keep telling about these stories that I'm gonna talk about, and you're like, well, come on, get to the heart of it. All right, so my first story is called Amar hasta morir, or like loving to the point of dying. And it's a story told in a book called Radical Faith. And this is the story of a changing context in the Catholic Church during the 60s and 70s, and how that context shaped the life of Sister Maura. Sister Maura Clark was a Maryknoll nun. She was born and raised in the Rockaways of Irish immigrant parents. And Maura served the people of Nicaragua, and she was in transit to El Salvador. When she arrived to El Salvador in 1980, she was murdered. But to understand why a nun from the Rockaways ended up in El Salvador and was murdered by the militia, you need to understand what was happening in her context that brought her to that place. And it's a great book. I don't think I'm gonna do it justice, I'm gonna try my best. All right, so this is Sister Maura. And she grew up hearing her parents' stories about the old country, about Ireland. And the stories that she heard from her dad, who was politically active in Ireland, were the stories of oppression and persecution of a country that was occupied. They were stories about conflict, first with the British Empire, then among brothers and sisters that were in, Protestants versus Catholics, who took opposite sides on what the future of their country should be. And she also grew up in a context in which her parents, who immigrated into the Rockaways, they immigrated with other people from Ireland, and they created a community in which families helped each other as a way to survive during harsh times and to overcome poverty. So when Sister Maura became a Maryknoll sister in the late 1950s, she brought that with her. She brought that circunstancia, that context with her. And in fact, she chose the Maryknoll sisters because their mission, and the mission stands to today, is to give witness to God's love and devote our lives in service overseas as nurses, doctors, teachers, theologians, social workers, environmentalists, and more. We serve the needs of the people, the poor, the ailing, and the marginalized, where we are missioned. So you can see how the context in which Maura had been brought up made her ripe for responding to her call, what her gifts long for her to do, like made her long for, and choosing to become a Maryknoll sister. The other important part of, as I see it, of the context are that there were a lot of really radical changes happening in the Catholic Church during the time that Maura was rising through the ranks of the Maryknoll mission. And as she was stepping into a leadership role, and she was fulfilling her calling. So Maura grew up with the old church, rich with traditions and rites, under a doctrine of meritocracy, like you earn what you get based on your good works, and at a time when Mass was offered in Latin for the people, right? So it was more like a relationship between the priest, and the priest was a conduit for the faith of the community. So that church went through a radical transformation globally after the Second Vatican Council, which took place between 1962 and 1965. And more locally, and I say locally, in Latin America, not here in Texas, That changed even further after a group of bishops from Latin America gathered in Medellin, Colombia in 1968. And that transformation changed the context from an emphasis on obedience and submission to one that recognized the lived experience of the people, and that set the stage for a theology that was more aligned with that passage from Luke that we read earlier. And it was a theology of liberation that focused not only on the spiritual, but also on the physical and material well-being of the people. And as Eileen so beautifully writes in her book, this transformation also was connecting the interior life, right? So our faith with the outside, the spiritual with the physical, and I would argue the faith and the works. And that flag is it's honoring the life of and the works of Sister Maura, and it is in front of a parish in Ciudad Sandino, a community where Maura worked. So I want to talk a little bit about her path to Nicaragua and then El Salvador. Maura started her life as a nun, as an ordered nun in the Bronx, and that's where she learned that poverty is not a moral flaw. And I'm going to read from Eileen's book. She wrote of Maura. When one of her second graders told her he couldn't accept the idea of God as father because he didn't want God to be anything like his brutal father, Maura was distraught, talking about that admission for days. But as in any poor neighborhood, the majority of people were simply trying to get by, navigating a society that didn't want to rent them an apartment or hire them for a job, and yet making progress, raising their children, finding ways to send them to high school and college, establishing hiring systems in civil service, saving for a house in Queens. So this is the context in which Maura is doing her formative years as a nun. When so with this experience in the Bronx, Maura then moves to Nicaragua, and she's living in Nicaragua and working there with an outpost in a town that was a mining town for a transnational company that had opened a town where there was a gold ore, and a community had formed around it of the workers that were working in that mine. So this was not a community of kinship. This was not a community that evolved naturally over decades or even centuries. This was a community formed around a specific company, transnational company. So the Maura now living in Nicaragua post the Second Vatican Council and the Medellin conference that I mentioned to you that happened in 1968 was now living in a different context. And Eileen writes about Maura in this moment that as she's doing her work, the concept of the church as the family of God meant that people had a responsibility to care for their neighbors. It also meant they had rights. They were God's beloved family, and that God wanted good things for them and not suffering. And now I'm going to try to find another quote from the book. I had the book on my overdrive. Okay, so the book examines the history of religion. Okay, that's not what I want. 1963. That's not what I want. All right. So her concept of as the Vatican Council invites all of the religious orders around the world to rethink the way that they relate to the people, right? So they went from having mass given in Latin to every community would have mass given in their in their language. As the church was also extending an invitation for parishioners to be more involved and for smaller groups that would study the scripture, gather to understand the Bible in the context of their lives of the now. The concept of the church as family meant that people had a responsibility to care for their neighbors. It also meant that they had rights, that they were God's beloved family, and that God wanted good things from them and not just suffering. And this was an important change in Maura's life, because this meant that as she was seeing the way that the militia was impacting and oppressing the life of the people for whom's faith she was responsible for, she was trying to create a learning community in Christ in this new way of being a church. She started to have a realization that her works also needed to include the advocating for the material and physical needs of the community that she had been called to serve. So the story is the story in the book Radical Faith is beautiful. It's sad at moments, but it's also full of hope. And I invite you to find the book and read it. I feel like the Reading Rainbow guy that sort of like gives you a snippet of a book and then tells you that you should go to a library and get it. So there's a fuller story, which is the what brought her to El Salvador. But I'm going to invite you to do that on your own, because we have 2 more stories to get to. So the second story that I want to share with you, it's called Define American. And it's a story about othering and belonging. And I'm now switching books, and I am now referencing the work of Jose Antonio Vargas, who is a journalist that was he was a dreamer. He was sent to the United States by his mom when he was a young kid to live with his grandparents who had immigrated to the United States, and they were in a capacity to bring him over. And rather than try to tell you Jose Antonio's story, I am going to do an attempt at watching a video where Jose Antonio can tell you a little bit of his story. And we tried this. I hope it works. And Holly, I'm looking at you. If it doesn't work, please let me know. It's working? Okay.
Mother wanted to give me a better life. So she sent me to live with my grandparents in Silicon Valley. I loved America the moment I got here. Embraced the language, the culture, the people. English was my second language, and I learned to speak American by watching Frasier, Home Improvement, The Golden Girls. I won the spelling bee in 8th grade by spelling indefatigable. In high school, I fell in love with journalism. I started working for my local newspaper, the Mountain View Voice. Then I got hired at the Washington Post. I covered the 2008 presidential campaign, from traveling on Hillary Clinton's plane to pheasant hunting with Huckabee. I've interviewed Al Gore for Rolling Stone and profiled Mark Zuckerberg for The New Yorker. I even won a Pulitzer Prize for covering the Virginia Tech massacre. At age 16, I rode my bike to the DMV to get my driver's permit. I brought my green card with me. The woman at the DMV flipped it around She leaned over and she whispered, "This is fake. Don't come back here again." I went home and confronted my grandfather. That was the first time I realized that I'm an undocumented immigrant, what some people call an illegal. The first person I told was Mrs. Denny, my choir teacher. After she told me that she was planning a choir trip to Japan, I told her I couldn't afford it. But she said we'd find a way, we'd figure it out. Then I decided to tell her the truth. It's not really about the money, I said. I don't have the right passport. I'm not supposed to be here. Mrs. Denny got it. The next day, she told me the choir was going to Hawaii instead.
It just mattered to me that Jose was hardworking, he was enthusiastic, he was always coming to class. And it's our job to educate them, to make them better citizens of the world. It doesn't matter what country they're from or, what their background or their legal papers are.
Mrs. Denny was the very first member of my personal Underground Railroad. Americans who decided to help undocumented immigrants like me. Other members of my Underground Railroad include Rich Fisher, my high school superintendent, and Pat Hyland, my high school principal. For more than a decade now, Pat and Rich have been with me every step of the way, guiding me and supporting me as I've tried to define what it means to be an American. I define American as someone who works really hard, someone who's proud to be in this country and wants to contribute to it. I'm independent. I pay taxes. I'm self-sufficient. I'm an American. I just don't have the right papers. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I'm sorry for the laws that I broke. What would you do if you were a choir teacher and found out that a student in your glee club can't travel for a competition? What would you do if you were a high school principal and found out that one of your students can't apply for financial aid? What would you do if your child's best friend didn't have papers? As a journalist, I've decided to do what I know best, ask questions. So let's talk. What would you do?
All right. So that's Jose Antonio's context. That's his circunstancia. And I don't presume that I know what Jose Antonio's faith is. I haven't had that conversation with him. But the point that I want to make with the story is that his circumstance brought him to do works in service of the poor and the oppressed. And he's doing that through an organization called Define American. And I was in a presentation that he gave late last year at a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation meeting. And one of the things that stuck with me the most was this part of his presentation where he talked about how for people who argue that, that immigrants are here illegally and that they deserve all of the nastiness that they get, is that apartheid was legal, the Holocaust was legal, slavery was legal, and colonialism was legal. And today we could argue that all of those things are horrible and that they should have never been legal, but they were at one point legal because legality is a matter of power and not justice. So Jose Antonio has taken his context and he's decided that he wants to help share stories about people who are oppressed because they are immigrant, people that are poor because they're immigrant. And, you know, he himself knows what it's like to, you know, he gained a lot of notoriety. And when he came out, so to speak, as an undocumented immigrant, he lost his job. He at one point ended up in a detention camp when he was visiting Texas. And he's taken on those stories, the stories that of his life and his circumstance, and the stories that he witnessed in others. And he's now using those stories to highlight what the experience of immigrants are. And I would say that those are the works that show me his faith, even though I have not had a conversation with him about faith. But in his works, por sus obras los conoceréis, right? By their works, you shall know them. And I want to read a segment from his book, a piece from his book. And the chapter is called Truth. Speaking of the truth, for years now, I haven't wanted to find out exactly how I got out of detention on July 15, 2014. For a person who's made a life out of asking questions, I didn't want to face the facts. I didn't want to know that while most undocumented immigrants are arrested, detained, and deported without due process, I was able to get out after 8 hours of being locked up. I didn't want to know that friends who had connections to the Philippine embassy in the US called the consul general and got him to call DHS to point out that I was Filipino. At the time, the detention centers in Texas were so packed that agents were doing what were called drag and drops, dropping you across the border right into Mexico. I didn't want to know that the reason why the agents kept moving me from cell to cell was because journalists and photographers were scheduled to tour the station that day. The same day I happened to be locked up. Agents didn't want journalists to see me locked up in a cell with the boys. I didn't want to know that the moment I was arrested at the airport, friends called their contacts at DHS and the White House. People in positions of power responded and offered help. Even though I didn't want to know, I knew I needed to know, however belatedly. So when he was in a position of being detained and being threatened with being sent back to a country that he does not know, he's been living here since he was a child, he had people in positions of power use their power and their privilege to help him out, to get him out of there. So what he and his colleagues are doing now is they're working with TV writers and script writers from Hollywood, filmmakers, to change the stories that you and I see in TV or in the movies about immigrants. And I'm just going to show you a little snippet that was highlighted in CNN earlier this month. And I hope this works. Can you see the CNN page? All right, awesome.
Recite our escape plan for if our parents got deported and we got separated in foster care. I begged my parents not to tell Santa where we lived because I was afraid he'd ask for papers. My whole life was built on a fear of this day coming, and it's here.
TV shows like the CW's Roswell, New Mexico are telling deeper, more relatable stories about the experiences of immigrants in the U.S. It's working with the advocacy group Define American, which helps show writers debunk stereotypes about immigrants and address real issues faced by the community.
Ever since I immigrated to this country in 1993, immigration has been a third rail of American politics. We help TV writers, producers, film directors better tell the story so that before we can even agree on what immigration reform is, right, we can actually be informed.
Define American has worked with over 75 TV and film projects, like the Party of Five reboot on Freeform. It addressed the painful challenges faced by a group of siblings whose parents have been deported to Mexico, along with those of a recurring character, an undocumented transgender immigrant.
You see, for me to renew DACA, I would have to present my birth certificate. That's the only way. That name, it's someone I never was.
The organization recently released a report about how immigrants are represented on TV and in movies with USC Norman Lear Center.
But we noticed that there was sort of a gap in what was happening in popular culture. And we felt like we could really step in that moment so that they could connect with members of the community who have lived experience and hear real authentic stories that would help to make the portrayals that we were seeing in TV and film a little bit more authentic and a little bit deeper.
Define American also worked with the writers of NBC's Superstore, who created a storyline about a Filipino character who finds out he's undocumented and later ends up in an immigrant detention facility.
How are things, like, really?
Oh, it's bad in here. It's cold and there aren't enough blankets. I mean, it is flat out disgusting. And apparently this is one of the nice places. The guards think all undocumented people are Latinos, so they just keep yelling at me in Spanish, and I don't understand what you're saying. I just want to go home.
Everything I learned about America, I learned from watching television. The popular culture is a big translator for us about what America is and what America represents.
All right. So, if it's true that por sus actos los conoceréis, by their acts, by their works, you shall know them, I would argue that if what Reverend Cohn is true, that any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's message. And if the opposite of that is true, that any message that is related to the liberation of the poor in a society is Christ's message, I would argue that the work of Define American and that what Jose Antonio Vargas is doing is showing whatever his understanding of faith is in the work that he's doing. The last story that I would like to share, and this one I'm getting emotional, it's called Diego's Silver Spoon. And this is learning what works are so that you can apply them to your life. I'm sorry. When Diego was born 15 years ago, one of my neighbors gifted me a set of a baby silver spoon and baby fork. And this is them. And they are tarnished because they were on the back of the drawer, the silver spoon drawer, the silverware drawer, because we don't hold this as a sign of high regard. This is and I'll tell you why it made me cry. It made me cry when she gifted this to me, because here I am working as a public health person in a community that has seen a lot of devastation due to all sorts of isms, right? And my son, my newborn son, had a silver spoon and a silver baby fork to be raised with, right? Like the thought that was the path that Diego was going to be growing in, what to me was horrifying. Like, that's not the future that I want for my son. It made me think about, I don't know if you guys ever saw that show, Silver Spoons, with Ricky Schroeder. It was an 80s show. I did not want my son to be like Ricky Schroeder. Let's just put it that way. So I cried because I had seen happy poverty as I was growing up in Puerto Rico with a really big extended family. You know, the kind of poverty where like you don't realize that you're poor. And I had seen unhappy affluence. I had seen unhappy poverty which is when the conditions of adversity and had been so devastating that it really breaks you down and it just shatters you. And I had also seen happy affluence, where you grow up with this warped sense of understanding of the world. So I had seen happy poverty and unhappy poverty, happy affluence and unhappy affluence. And I that silver spoon made me think that Raj and I needed to be really intentional about how we wanted to raise Diego and his siblings. So this is Diego now. He celebrated his 15th birthday in the during the quarantine, and this is his freshman 15 burger, which we recreated here, because had we not been in a pandemic, we would have taken him to Waco to have that delicious burger there with friends. When Diego was a baby, he came with Raj and I to every march. He participated in the Day Without an Immigrant March in his stroller. He came to coalition meetings in a papoose. Like when we did homeschool catechism with Eileen and with Sarah and others, we wanted him to understand that faith goes alongside with works, and that meant that some of our classes were cleaning parks and doing planting trees and writing letters to families in detention centers. And a few weeks ago, when Raj and Diego were getting ready to mow the lawn in front of our house, we noticed that our neighbor's lawn, which it's like our properties don't have any fence or anything that separates them, that our neighbor's lawn had not been mowed for quite a while. You could see the difference between like our tall grass and their tall grass, right? And so Diego, Rogelio says we should do Pastor Leland's lawn as well. And they went and they spoke with Pastor Leland, and he said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. The guy that does my front lawn is he has been sick for a while, and so we've just been waiting for him to get better." These days in the middle of a pandemic, when somebody who does your lawn gets sick, the likelihood that they're going to be sick for a while, it's high. So we asked for Pastor Leland's blessing and went ahead and Rogelio and Diego mowed the lawn. And it was 90 degrees that day, right? Like this is fall in Austin. And when it's 90 degrees, you just want to get in and out. You just want to do the minimum. You just want to cut the lawn and go back into the AC. And Raj and Diego did our lawn, and they did Pastor Leland's lawn at the same time, because that was what was Diego's to do at that moment. And we wanted him to understand that even in the small things that help make community, that help neighbors, that where you can show love to your neighbor, like cutting the lawn is a valid way to show love to your neighbor. So with that, I just want to say that I invite you to think about Reverend James Cone's writing as a Mad Libs for your life, and to think about insert what is yours to do here, and think about how any public health work that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not Christ's public health. Any public health that is indifferent to the theme of liberation is not Christian public health. Any philanthropy that is not related, any accounting that is not related to the liberation of the poor, any work that you do teaching at a university that is not related to the liberation of the poor. I invite you to think about that as a Mad Libs, as a way to think about how your circumstances, your eye as a beholder, helps you find work in everything that you do. Thank you so much. I'm sorry that I went over time with my remarks. I'll send this to you later.
That was great, Lourdes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. This is our, Liam, can you say hi? Hi. Hi. And Eloise, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Grounding stories in kids is so powerful. So I really appreciate that. And hearing Diego's I got tears too. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Let's see. So as we do after our Faith Plus Works, two of the things that we're doing here at First UU and Hub is we've signed on to the prophetic pledge, which is, and also the Power to Protect New Jersey campaign. The prophetic pledge is part of Reverend William Barber and Liz Theo Harris's Poor People's Campaign, their national call for moral revival. And the pledge is for 1,000 congregations and community groups to commit to getting 1,000 people each to vote. So First U and Hub have done that. Our Hub fellows, our youth fellows are working on a tabling campaign right now, and we're doing a bit of registration, but we're really engaged in that. And invite this group to be part of our tabling if you're in Orange, or check out the Poor People's Campaign to learn more about it. And the Power to Protect campaign has a flu action group and promoting awareness and resources to protect our communities while the flu and complications of having to work with COVID pandemic at the same time are happening. So those are two of the works we're doing. And I guess in line with what we do at our worship services, as we do, we always ask for support in sort of helping to keep this work going. And to keep these groups coming together. We are able to invest in people and in our buildings to keep doing this. So we appreciate any support people can give. Holly, I think, is going to drop our PayPal link into the chat. And we just, really appreciate any support anyone can give. I'll make a couple more closing words, I guess, but Molly is going to give us a closing reading right now. So Molly, take it away.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you so much, Lourdes. This is a poem that is called Say Thank You, Say I'm Sorry, and it was published in the New York Times in June of 2020. Say Thank You, and it's by Jericho Brown. Say thank you, say I'm sorry. I don't know whose side you're on, but I am here for the people who work in grocery stores that glow in the morning and close down for deep cleaning at night. Right up the streets and in cities I mispronounce. In towns too tiny for my big black car to quit. And in every wide corner of Kansas, where going to school means at least one field trip to a slaughterhouse. I want so little. Another leather-bound book, a gimlet with lavender gin, bread so good when I taste it, I can tell you how it's made. I'd like us to rethink what it is to be a nation. I'm in a mood about America today. I have PTSD about the Lord. God save the people who work in grocery stores. They know a bit of glamour is a lot of glamour. They know how much it costs for the eldest of us to eat. Save my loves and not my sentences before I see them. I draw a mole near my left dimple. Add flair to the smile they can't see behind my mask. I grin or lie, or maybe I wear the mouth of a beast. I eat wild animals. While some of us grow up knowing what gnocchi is, the people who work at the grocery store don't care. They say thank you They say, sorry, we don't sell motor oil anymore. With a grief so thick you could touch it. Go on, touch it. It is early, it is late. They have washed their hands. They have washed their hands for you, and they take the bus home.
Thanks, Mal. Would you share that in our chat, please?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, I guess it's been really nice. And I guess I've got some announcements before we close out. But yeah, thank you so much, Lourdes and Molly and Holly, for the readings as well. So Mindy mentioned it earlier, and we shared our poster, but this season, Faith Plus Works, Turn on the Love series started with Mindy in September. This afternoon's talk with Lourdes has been awesome. Sarah Townley and Leslie Rennis are both on the line. Sarah's going to be talking with us, is invited to come back on November 22nd. And Leslie is going to be with us on December 20th. So please come on back. It's always a great conversation. So we love having new faces, new voices be part of it. So thanks for joining us today. We've had a few physically distanced in-person events outside the last month to turn on the love. And we built a earth oven, and we fired it up for our last event, which was celebrating the University of Orange's Enciende el Amor weekend of live music at restaurants around Orange. And I wanted to show a quick little video that Lori, I don't know if she's on the line right now, but she took of our firings. So this is what we'll be doing again pretty soon.
What are you doing here? Just firing, making pizzas in our earth oven.
Can you guys hear it?
Thursday making pizzas. We're celebrating the Enciende el Amor music festival and the inaugural firing of the pizza oven.
Oh, beautiful.
Pretty good.
I'm going to watch you.
Fire's hot.
We're going.
Got a
What?
Fire Master Stephen Panache is keeping things warm over here. Trying not to burn off his fingers. Good.
Good idea.
All right. It comes close every time. Yep. There we go.
Beautiful.
Pops up pretty quick.
And who made this? Who made this?
Mutters Local Union 3547, which includes Stephen, myself, another Stephen, Aubrey helped, Cesar helped. Where's Cesar? Over there. Yeah,
Okay.
it was a team effort. John Foster. Yep. Yeah. Did the foundation, then we decorated the top. It's all pretty nice up there. Looking pretty bedazzled, nicely dazzled.
Bedazzled.
Oh, you got a bottle. Cool. Good job. Yeah. We got some fire tool helpers over here.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Liam,
yeah.
can you say
Look
hi?
at
Say hi to Lori.
that.
That's the
Okay.
garbage. Thank you. I'll throw that away.
All right. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See ya.
So that was our inaugural firing of the pizza oven. We can watch it again right after, Liam. And wanted to show you that because the hub turns 5 in just a couple weeks. We've been around for 5 years, which is pretty incredible. And we just decided to have a 5th birthday party on either Saturday, November 14th or Sunday, November 15th as a backup date. We're going to have a physically distanced but very safely social parking lot party with popcorn, pizza, and hopefully, Frank, we haven't really talked about this part yet, but we can talk more about it, a projected short films on maybe the back wall of the parish hall. We just need to bundle up and people should bring a chair, but we'll be sharing warm spiced cider, which we tested out again at that inaugural pizza firing and had a great time with. So we'll be sending out more information this week, but we're celebrating 5 years. So we really appreciate you all being here and helping us to celebrate that in place, in person, if you can. So, and sort of lastly, back to our works as a community, please check out the prophetic pledge and consider joining us in using the tools that they provide. And sort of the things that, yeah, the tools that they provided and shared to help us sort of defend our democracy and be ready to stand up if we need to after this election. Lourdes was anchored it in a bit more theological conversation, but I think our works, our faith is defined by our works, and we really need to stand up for everybody that democracy is meant to be for and ours is for. So we're gonna blow out the candle, but then we can have a conversation. So thank you all so much. You wanna blow out the candle to end Faith Plus Works, October 2020? Yeah, so thanks everybody for being here. And let's a UU thing is to have conversations. So if people want to stick around and talk a little, please let's do that. Mindy, go ahead.
We have to say hi to Josephine, who's our student. Hey, Josephine.
Oh, hello.
Where are you calling in from? Where are you these days?
I'm in Düsseldorf, Germany.
Wow. Welcome, welcome.
Where it is about 10 p.m.
Oh, so glad you could come. Wow, that's really cool.
Really cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for
I
sharing.
know Lourdes.
Thank you,
I know
everyone.
Lourdes is glad to see you.
I'm glad to see you all.
That might be the farthest Faith Plus Works tune in we've had. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Josephine. It's so exciting.
He gets the prize.
What's the prize?
You know, our love and appreciation for having called from so far.
So good. Thank you so much, Lourdes. Thank you, everyone.
Lourdes, that was amazing. That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. And tear-provoking. Yep.
I know. I knew it would happen.
Yeah. Everybody's so quiet. Should we say goodbye?
Thank you,
Thank you all for
Lourdes.
coming.
Yeah.
See you next week for Sarah.
Oh, wait.
Next month.
Next month.
Oh yeah, next month. Next month for Sarah. Yeah, next month. Next month. Bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Have a great one, everybody.
You too.
Do you want to say bye, Ellie?
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Charlie.